So what if heavy weapon teams but bigger and more firepower? Let's talk about the rules for the new Field Ordnance Battery, leaks from the Guard Codex. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking more Guard leaks. As I'm sure plenty of you will be aware, plenty of the Guard Codex has been leaked to the internet by Mordian Glory now, and I thought it would be interesting to focus on just a few of the more interesting units and datasheets that I've been looking forward to seeing. The normal disclaimer with this one, the leaks are from a previous playtester copy of the Codex apparently. They've got points, datasheets and weapon profiles, but it's definitely possible that a fair few of the values might have changed by the time they make their way into the main book, though I do suspect that the broad thrust of the rules will generally be right, and then it'll just be if Games Workshop's decided to tweak anything for the better or worse before they got to official release based on feedback. Perhaps the points costs are some of the most shaky things out of this, as they're the most easily adjusted, so I basically treat this as a bit of a sneak peek of the rules and not get too head up on fine details until we get the actual Codex release. As always, massive shout out to Mordian Glory. Very nice of him to go to the trouble of making the leaked datasheets public, and if you're a Guard player who somehow hasn't found his channel yet, then you should certainly check out his channel linked down in the video description. Onto the Ordnance Battery itself though, along with updated Rough Riders, the new Rogel Dawn tank, and the new Lord Solar, these are some of the most interesting units out of the new book I think. A whole new class of heavy guns to shoot the enemy with. Pretty great if you did want to run a more foot-themed regiment that's not quite as reliant on heavy armour maybe. From the leaks it looks like we'll be able to field these 3 crude artillery pieces with units of between 2 and 4 models in them, which really reinforces to my mind that they'll probably be boxed in sets of 2, much like the 2 that you get in the new Kadiastan's launch box. I was just a little bit confused about this because they did show off the picture of 3 of them like this, and often in their previews they tend to more take pictures of the kit rather than the individual options, so I was wondering whether they'd be packaged in 2s or 3s. My guess is that they're just showing off the different options here, and they probably will be remaining to be packaged in 2s. In any case, apparently they're going to be around about 70 points per model, might be a bit give or take depending on final rules revisions, and apparently there's not going to be any extra cost depending on the loadout. They're all going to cost the same amount, whether you take the Ignores Line of Sight Mini Earthshaker, the rocket pods, or the big las cannon. Keywords wise, they're going to have the platoon keyword but not core. This will restrict them from plenty of buffs, particularly the commander rerolls and things like that, but according to the Rough Rider League, apparently it means that platoon units can get orders, so it should mean that you should be able to order these with infantry officers with the regiment style orders. In particular, getting access to take aim with the +1 to hit and the extra AP looks like it's going to be the money for these. The leaks from Mr. Mordian Glory didn't say whether or not they were infantry or artillery, or at least not that I saw. If there's any clarification, I'll happily update it as a pinned comment. My guess is that they'd be artillery though, they just look a little bit big for being able to effectively walk through walls like the infantry can. They look a lot more like wheeled artillery pieces rather than the heavy weapon teams that you can pick up and move. If they're artillery, I think there's a reasonable chance they'd pick up the vehicle keyword as well for better or worse. It'd allow them to remain to firing combat if they're not firing blast weapons, but mean that they wouldn't get any saves from light cover or anything like that, and wouldn't interact with terrain quite as well. I feel like if they do wind up being infantry, they probably will be a bit better, but if they are artillery, then they might be able to move and shoot without penalty, which would be a bit better for getting lines of sight. Statline wise, they maybe got a little bit more movement than I thought they might have. Some artillery pieces only move the 3 inches, but these guys can move 6. They hit on 4s, both at weapon skill or ballistic skill, a strength 3, toughness 4, 6 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 6, and a 4+ save. It's quite nice to see that they're a little bit tougher than the absolutely fragile heavy weapon teams that we've already got. They're basically just the toughness of 2 guardsmen stuck together. Gaining toughness for 6 wounds and a 4+ save is fairly nice, but overall it still makes them pretty fragile for 70-point models. At least they won't just be ruined by a burst of small arms fire, but it is a fairly bad place to be in when you're fairly efficiently damaged both by anti-tank weapons and by small arms. It just means that any spare firepower of any variety that the opponent has going spare will be able to tear some big chunks out of them. It does look like it's going to be their damage output that needs to carry them. Speaking of which, definitely the most exciting part of the unit in my opinion are the weapons. As pictured, there's 3 to choose from: the Bombast Field Gun, the Malice Rocket Launcher, or the Heavy las Cannon. The Field Gun is basically a mini Earthshaker, 48-inch range, D6 shots at strength 7, AP-2 and damage 2, ignores line of sight and gets blast. Barrage type weapons are a lot more relevant in the Guard. They got that exemption to the barrage nerf thing in the balanced data slate, which I strongly suspect will be keeping going into the new codex, and things like mortar teams do have some pretty good value in the current codex, just a couple of teams to stack a bunch of ignores line of sight firepower on the enemy while not being able to hit back in return. I must admit though, I'm not sure how well this is going to compare to the other artillery pieces, as we'll see in a second. Otherwise, the Malice rocket launcher has got a 48-inch range, D6 plus 6 shots, strength 6, AP minus 1, and damage 1. It has blast, but at least according to the Mordian Glory leaks, apparently this isn't going to ignore line of sight, or it's rumoured not to. I did kind of wonder whether this one might be the case. When Games Workshop previewed the unit, they specifically called out that the bombast gun would be able to ignore line of sight, but they conspicuously didn't say anything about the other one. Despite just from the appearance of the rocket launcher, the rockets are clearly angled upwards. It would make sense to me if it was a barrage weapon like mortars and things. Still though, it could just be an omission from the leaks. Whether or not it does have barrage, I think is going to be really quite a big deal for it though. Otherwise it's just going to be a 70-point unit that's chugging out a bunch of anti-infantry shots. Certainly not useless for shooting down light infantry, but I feel like there's an awful lot of things in the game that just really don't care about strength 6, AP 1 and damage 1, particularly anything with Armour of Contempt isn't going to mind that much. Finally, and interestingly, the heavy las cannon had two different profiles leaks, I'm guessing one of which is an updated version from a later playtest codex, but Mordian Glory from the leaks wasn't particularly sure which was which. The two profiles are either a single shot at strength 14, AP 4, D6 plus 6 damage and ignore invul saves, or a heavy 2 shot at strength 10, AP 4, and damage D3 plus 3. Against most targets, average math would have you getting a fairly similar result out of both of those guns. I would argue that probably the strength 14 one is the stronger of the two rules. It is very swingy and all or nothing, but wounding toughness 7 things on 2 pluses and ignoring invul saves are both really big things, and it basically just gives the gun a bit more reliability if you do get that hit through. It's not all one way though. If your opponent doesn't have any enormous vehicles to target, then the 2-shot one is going to be better against heavy infantry. Either way, I'd say both of them seem strong, and perhaps the heavy las cannon looks like one of the more interesting options. Overall, my take on the unit is that the durability isn't particularly strong at 70 points. They are going to be somewhat easy to remove from the board either with anti-tank or anti-infantry, and it does mean that they have to deal some heavy damage quickly, unless I suppose you're firing from out of line of sight with the bombast gun. I suspect that even in the best case scenario, with their low movement as well, you're probably only going to want a few of these and not to massively spam them. With low movement, they might just struggle to get line of sight on things, and you might be better with a mix of these and tanks, even if these happen to be better efficient shooting platforms than the tanks were somehow. Otherwise, from the orders, if they can get the regimental ones unrestricted, then they could get take aim for +1 to hit and an extra AP -1. That seems like if you're running these, you almost certainly want to have that one going. These are really quite big, expensive shooting platforms, and not having a massive buff like that going for relatively cheap seems like a bit of a mistake. Forwards for the Emperor could also be interesting out of those leaked Officer Praefectus orders. That one would allow you to move and shoot with no penalty if they do wind up being infantry and not vehicles. Out of the weapons, I think it's maybe a little bit silly to do too much intense math hammer based on leaks profiles, seeing as things could be quite different when the actual codex releases. But just looking at things broadly, it does look like the bombast field gun maybe looks a bit underwhelming compared with other artillery. Just comparing it with the Manticore, which has gained D6 plus 3 shots, strength 9 and damage 3, I feel like the Manticore is going to be the better choice against a lot of targets compared with the bombast gun, and even if you get the orders, then it seems still a little bit equivocal. My guess would be that the flat 3 damage would probably win out for the Manticore. Even if you've got a free order going from somewhere, then it's going to be around about 4 or 5 hits at strength 7, AP 3 and damage 2 from a couple of those bombast guns, versus around 3 or 4 from the Manticore at the strength 9 and damage 3. Hopefully they manage to balance the artillery. Between these and the Basilisks and the Manticores, Guard do have really quite a lot of things vying for the same role. Otherwise, the Malice rocket launcher just doesn't seem particularly exciting to me. It'd average you around 5 hits at strength 6, AP -1, or 6 or 7 hits at strength 6, AP -2 with take aim. I'd say perhaps the biggest problem is that it's just really not going to worry any hard targets, though I guess it might be one of the best ones that might make good use of Hammer of the Emperor if we still have easy access to that in the Codex. Finally, I feel like perhaps the heavy las cannon is probably the winner out of these. I feel like it's still perhaps the scariest and most threatening of them, even if it does wind up being the 2-shot profile rather than the big single shot ignoring the invuls. If it does get the big shot though, then I feel like it's just going to be a threat that's so scary to ignore the opponent won't be able to. It might still miss half the time, but if you get lucky then it could just one round something like a dreadnought, which does seem pretty terrifying to have left on the table. The 2-shot damage D3+3 one also looks pretty efficient, a little bit more effective against heavy infantry, even if high invulns are going to make it worse. My overall take from the leaks is that the las cannon probably looks the most interesting out of the three, though of course we will have to see how it stacks up against the other guard units for the same battlefield role, whether it'll be able to outshoot things like demolisher cannons or vanquisher cannons for the anti-tank duties. Anyway, let me know what you think of the Field Ordnance Batteries then. Could you see yourself using these in a guard army? And if you had to choose between the guns with these stats, which ones would you choose and why? Again, full credit for the leaked rules for Mordian Glory. Feel free to check out his channel that's linked down below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. I'll certainly be covering a few more datasheets from the leaked ones, as well as any other news that we get from Games Workshop. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.